Super Mario 64. Now this is a game that's existed almost as long as I have. And for 26 years now, this game has been regarded as one of the most key video games in gaming history. Like, people usually credit this as being the, inventor of 3D graphics in gaming, or at least pioneering, making it the mainstream. And I can't help but wonder, why haven't I played this game after all this time? I figured it was time to crack down and actually get around to playing one of the most revered titles in all of gaming. Super Mario 64 has crazy nostalgic graphics. Even for a game that I've never played, as soon as I loaded up the game, I got the nostalgia. Everything's so colorful. You got that mid-90s, angular vibe, you know? You're not expecting 4K Ultra HD, or at least you better not be, for a game that is made in 1996. But even then, I can't help but just feel warm and happy looking at this game. The different worlds you go to are very varied. Cool Mountain and Snowman's Land might both be the ice levels, but they feel very different from each other, just based on how they're laid out and the different obstacles you encounter throughout both of them. Sure, there's 3 water worlds between Jolly Roger Bay, Dire Docks, and Wet Dry World, but they all feel very different. Jolly Roger Bay is all about cave diving and spelunking for treasure in sunken ships. Dire Docks is like a secret water cave that leads to this industrial submarine dock. Wet Dry World's like a sunken city, very Atlantis-y, and you get the ability to control the water level by activating these switches. Don't even get me started on how creative Tick-Tock Clock is. I mean, you're literally running up the giant inner workings of a clock. Like, how does that come to mind as a level when you're making this? I don't know, it's crazy, but it's super cool. At least most of the maps are cool. Not everything in Super Mario 64 is exactly a visual banger. You know, Lethal Lava Land being the only fire world in the game, I mean, it doesn't really have a good theme to it. I was kind of hoping for some igneous rock, some kind of volcanic paths. I mean, there is a volcano there, but for the most part, it's kind of just a bunch of random crap dumped into a lake of lava. This world looks like a developer dumped a child's toy box into a volcano and then was like, hey, yep, there it is. That's a level right there. And then Hazy Maze Cave and Dire Docks. I mean, nothing, I guess, specifically wrong with them. They're just boring to look at. They're just caves. You know, they do their job as caves, but I mean, how exciting is a cave to look at? I guess you can make caves exciting, but Super Mario 64 didn't. The characters are okay looking. I mean, Mario and Peach seem to have translated well, although I can't say the same about Bowser. He could have used a little more time to bake in the oven. He came out a little chonky, like someone gave him plastic surgery with Legos. Also, for having a bunch of unique critters in the Mario universe, I'm kind of disappointed how most of these are designed in Mario 64. A lot of enemies are just black orbs, bob-ombs, amps, bullies. There's literally enemies that are just black orbs that spit fire at you. It's a very boring concept on the eyes. I wish they got a little more creative. Everything about this game's audio hits right though. The music is fantastic. It's not exactly a huge catalog, but I mean, you load up Bob on Battlefield for the first time and you got this bombastic, adventurous tune playing. Or you go to a water map like Jolly Roger Bay and you just have this cool, serene theme going on. Outside of that, the game just has good atmospheric sound. I mean, the very first time I loaded up on Princess Peach's lawn, I could hear birds chirping and crickets cricketing. I go to Big Boo's haunt and there's this dark, howling wind, this ominous laughter from ghosts in the distance. I was impressed. It really set the mood of the atmosphere. If we're talking about presentation for Super Mario 64, I mean, this game nails it. Even by today's standards, I kind of wish or hope that some games go full circle back to this style, because I couldn't get enough of it. I thought it was fantastic. I don't think there's going to be much to say about Super Mario 64's story, to be honest. Normally I'd throw up a spoiler alert right here, but I don't know that there's anything to spoil. There's barely a story at all. I mean, the game starts off with Mario getting an invite to Princess Peach's castle because Peach has cake for him. No, not that kind. Well, I don't know, maybe that kind. But I mean, that's it. That's our hero's calling to adventure. So I start running up to the castle, and then this little floaty bastard comes down and kind of just randomly dumps a bunch of exposition. Goes on about how the power stars are missing, and if Mario's going to be able to save the day, and this all comes out of nowhere, because I'm like, what the hell are you talking about, dude? I'm here for cake. Like, none of this makes sense. But, you know, that's how you set up the game, I guess. You just have a random guy fly down from the sky and say, hey, go do this. There was this one line from a toad in the castle trying to explain that, everyone's trapped in the castle walls because Bowser, by the way, in case it wasn't obvious, Bowser's behind all this. He stole the stars. He stole Princess Peach. Who would have thunk it? But apparently he tries to say that everyone's trapped inside the castle walls. Well, I mean, no, I just went out the front door like 20 seconds ago, dumbass. What are you talking about? I don't know what this line's about. I ignored it very quickly. Never comes up again. It's never relevant. There's this one point in Dire Dire Docks where you're supposed to like capture Bowser at a submarine, I think. It's a weirdly mandatory mission, which there's very few of those in this game. And I don't know why they made it mandatory, because it's really not plot relevant. You find a submarine, you grab a star, when you go back to Dire Dire Docks, the submarine's gone. You don't encounter Bowser, nothing happens, there's no cause and effect, so I don't really know why they made this a mandatory mission. It was very... nothing there. And then finally, eventually you beat the game and you fight Bowser and you win. And like, I'm not even kidding, that is the entire plot of Super Mario 64. I don't even think reading between the lines will get you much more info. Not much in the way of story, but I gotta say, this is a Mario game. If you came to a Mario game expecting like a blockbuster story, you're out your damn mind. You don't play Mario games for the story. It's negligible, it's there. Is it a good story? Absolutely not. But does it make the game a worse experience? No, it doesn't. It's just something that exists and you ignore it and then you go about your day. I mean, this is the most important part of the game, is the gameplay. Mario's jump from 2D to 3D, obviously they had to kind of adjust for some things. First of all, Mario has a lot more moves into his repertoire. You know, you don't just have a jump, you got a long jump to cover distances. You got a triple jump for maximum height if you have the runway to pull it off. You got the side flip, which is absolutely useless because it barely ever works. Then you got the back flip, which is the most consistent jump and easy to pull off, get some height in the backwards direction. These are all pretty easy to pull off, nothing crazy other than just using the control stick and the A button, so it's appreciated. Mario's also got a set of punches and kicks under his tool belt. It helps dispose of enemies, you know. Jumping on enemies isn't exactly the cakewalk it used to be in 2D days, you know. You only had an X and a Y axis to worry about. When things jump to 3D, it gets a little more imprecise. I mean, you can still jump on enemies if you're a Mario purist, but the punch and kick kind of adds like a line of hitbox, if that makes sense, so it's a little easier to kill enemies that way, or at least it's another option if you can't quite get used to jumping in a 3D space. That's about where I'll end the praise on Mario's controls though, because that's gonna be the glaring issue with Super Mario 64, is how Mario controls. The camera. Let's start with the camera. First of all, this thing likes to bump into walls like the cameraman hit every pub on the way over with the boys. And it inexplicably has the craziest ability to go at the worst angles at the worst possible times. I'm talking about when I'm climbing up mountains and trying to make precise jumps on small platforms, this thing will just go off in some random direction and I'm struggling with the controls and trying to see what's ahead of me so that I don't fall and lose progress or die. Also, very occasionally, I would enter this like, not first person, but over the shoulder view mode, where Mario would just stop dead in his tracks and kind of look around the environment. But I did this accidentally, a lot. It was too easy to accidentally do. Now I gotta say, I am playing on the Nintendo Wii U instead of the Nintendo 64. That means my camera controls are mapped to a control stick, which, you know, if I'm trying to tilt left or right, also very easy to tilt upward. You know, on a Nintendo 64 controller, there were 4 different buttons that controlled the camera. If you were hitting left or right, you were hitting completely different buttons. It's a lot harder to accidentally look up. So I could say that maybe this is a Wii U unique problem, but I can't help but say that I experienced it, and that it bothered me. The worst part is Mario's inability to simply pivot his feet to change direction. It's like he needs to do like a half circle walk every time I want to look the other way, and it sucks, dude. Because I'll be on very small platforms trying to line up and make precise jumps, you know, just barely trying to adjust my angle, and instead of Mario just kind of shifting in place, he'll straight up run off platforms. I don't get why he can't turn without having like a radius to it. It makes no sense. It led to so many frustrating moments later on in the game, I couldn't even count it. It was a huge detriment. Let's bring the mood back up a bit. I'm going to go back to how I was talking about the design differences from 2D to 3D. So, with Mario jumping to 3D, they kind of changed how level layouts work. You know, the Mario games of yesteryear were very 2D linear levels. You ran from point A to point B, across the finish line, hey, there you go, have some fireworks. In this game, the different worlds are like big open sandbox, kind of arena-style levels. And you don't just run from point A to point B. The idea is that there's multiple power stars, which is your main objective in this game, hidden in each level. There's 7 power stars per level. The idea is that you keep revisiting the level to go back for different power stars. You may go to a map and run one direction to get one power star, and then run to a completely different corner of a map to get a different power star. The best part about all this is that for the most part, with very, very few exceptions, all of the power stars are optional. There's a total of 120 power stars in the game, but you only need 70 to beat the game, which means you have a wiggle room of 50 power stars to pick and choose what levels you want to do. So if you get stuck on a power star and can't quite figure it out, you can set it down. You can go get some other power stars, even in other levels, and come back to the one you're stuck on later. Or if you straight up see a power star and you think to yourself, oh yeah, no, fuck that, I ain't doing that. You can totally do that. You can ignore the power star entirely and still make it to the end of the game. That is the beauty of Super Mario 64. You can kind of choose your own adventure to a certain extent. It puts a lot of control in the player's hand. And it adds some replayability, you know, even after you beat the game, why not try to go back and get the stars that you couldn't collect earlier? This is a fantastic design decision, and it works so well with how Mario is in a 3D environment now. It's a lot more explorative. Some of these worlds just have innate creative traits to them. Like I mentioned how in Wet Dry World you can raise and lower the water level using switches in the level, but you can also choose the water level based on how high you jump into the entrance to the world. If I make a Hail Mary jump to the very top of the painting, the water level is going to be raised to the max, and this actually gives me the ability to access a sub-area in Wet Dry World. Or I can jump in at the very bottom of the painting, and the water level will be lowered down to ankle height, which allows me to accomplish completely different tasks. I can go to Tick-Tock Clock. The position of the minute hand on the clock to the entrance of the world actually affects the world itself. If the minute hand's on noon when I enter Tick-Tock Clock, everything will be frozen in time. All the moving platforms will stop moving, rotating platforms will stop rotating. This allows me to access certain areas I couldn't access if they were moving. And then if I go in when the minute hand's on a 3, 6, or a 9, these rotating and moving platforms will move at various speeds, which is also necessary to access different areas. It is such a small, very easy to miss detail that affects the gameplay in such a huge way. It is such a creative little, I feel like I'm overusing the word creative, but that really is what it is. It's just it's such a neat mechanic that you wouldn't think about until you notice it. Even Peach's castle acts as more than just a hub world. At first glance, you just think it's the castle you run through to get from level to level, and it's kind of pointless in of itself, but there's actually 15 hidden power stars in the castle itself, which means you can spend time exploring the castle and actually get awarded for it as if it was its own level in the game. It is super good use of the space. Super Mario 64 tends to have a consistent difficulty curve too, at least in the level design. You know, there's 120 different power stars. It's inevitable that there's going to be some hard ones early on and some easy ones later on. You know, in Snowman's Land, I experienced one of the easiest power stars in the entire game in this deep freeze ice maze. I feel like maze is being a bit of a generous word. It took me like 20 seconds to get this star. Just a few minutes later, I'm struggling with one of the hardest stars in the game in my opinion, getting past the snowman's fat ass head where he keeps blowing me off this icy, slippery bridge, and the idea is that you use this big penguin as a windbreaker to make it across without being blown off the mountainside. The goddamn penguin goes do-si-do to and fro, so it's such a pain in the ass trying to stay behind him, and oh my god, fuck the snowman! What was I talking about? So the actual maps themselves tend to go in a linear fashion with difficulty. The very early maps are kind of hard to die on. Like the first map, Bob-omb Battlefield, very wide, open. There's enemies here and there, but there's nothing that instant kills you. There's very few environmental hazards. As you progress through the game, you come across more worlds that have treacherous heights, pools of lava, water that you gotta hold your breath through, insta-kill quicksand, ice physics. Oh my god, the ice physics in this game. This shit's turned up to 11. I mean, I get that ice is supposed to be slippery, but I mean, look at this. This is crazy. They needed to dial down the ice physics. By the time you're at the end of the game, the maps are very treacherous. It's just a bunch of small floating platforms for the most part, and you don't have a lot of walking room. Overall, there are just a ton of fun levels in Super Mario 64. I gotta say, some of my favorites have to be like the slides, where I'm blitzing down at breakneck speed and have to make it to the end in one piece. There are these Bowser courses that you have to go through to unlock the next segments of the castle. But these aren't like the usual 3D sandbox spaces, these are actually more like the linear courses from older Mario games where you gotta get to the finish line. But they just translate so well to 3D. Something about running the gauntlet of obstacles and trying to survive and make it to the end just is super fun. It feels good bringing that old kind of style of gameplay back into this new 3D twist. Even on the opposite end of the scale, I love the levels where you gotta explore the 3D environments. You know, running around a map, looking around every corner for all the red coins. Running through Big Boo's haunt, exploring every room of the mansion, trying to go on a ghost hunt. You know, these were really fun, and it was a really good way to utilize the 3D environments. But of course, that doesn't mean every level in the game is an absolute killer. There's a lot of stars that feel repetitious. I go to Bob on Battlefield and it's like, alright, run this gauntlet, climb a mountain, fight a boss. And then the very next level is, alright, run this gauntlet, climb the mountain. This time you're racing a turtle. Fuck am I racing a turtle? It's a turtle. I go to Womp's Fortress. Alright, run this gauntlet, climb this fortress, fight a boss. Alright, next level. Alright, run this gauntlet, climb the fortress, but a little higher. Cool Mountain is like, alright, go down this icy slide, get a star at the end. A couple levels later, alright, go down this icy slide, get a star at the end. Hey, by the way, we added a penguin. Big Boo's Hunt. Fight a big ghost. Next level, fight a big ghost. Couple levels later, fight a big ghost. Hazy Maze Cave. Alright, navigate this toxic maze, find the secret exit to a star. One level later, alright, navigate this toxic maze, find the secret exit to a star. The two exits to the two different stars are like a stone throw apart. I don't even know why they're different stars. The absolute worst offenders are actually TikTok Clock and Rainbow Ride, the last two maps of the game. Because these maps, by design, aren't 3D sandbox environments like all the maps before them. They're like really linear 2D courses, but not in the fun way like the Bowser courses are. The thing about the Bowser courses is that you do them once and you're done, and they're fun. But TikTok Clock and Rainbow Ride, there's multiple stars on. If you want to collect all the stars, you gotta run through them like 7 times, which means you're running up the exact same set of rotating gears in a clock 7 times. You are riding the exact same slow-ass magic carpet ride 7 times in a row. And like I said earlier, these are very easy levels to die on, so if you mess up, you're probably doing more and more attempts, and they just wear their welcome down way too fast to be enjoyable. There's also a lot of obscure stars in this game. You know, this game has a funny habit of just placing the next needed path or the next objective up out of camera view. Big Boo's Haunt does this. Hazy Maze Cave does this. There is a star on Womp's Fortress called Blast Away the Wall, and the idea is that you launch Mario out of this cannon into this very specific chunk of wall. But there's nothing to convey that there's a star there, so without looking it up or being told by someone else who's played this, I don't know how a new player would expect to find that star. The only hint you get is blast away the wall, but like, bitch, I'm on a fortress, the whole thing's made of walls. Mario 64 also attempted to bring caps into the mix as kind of a replacement power-up. You know, back in the older games, you got your fire flowers, your invincibility stars, your Tanuki suits. In Mario 64, you got your wing cap, your metal cap, and your vanish cap. The wing cap lets you fly around, or rather glide around in the sky, kind of bypassing all the hazards on the ground level. The metal cap makes Mario invulnerable to all damage, and makes him heavy enough to sink to the bottom of bodies of water. And then the vanish cap makes him invisible to enemies, also immune to all damage, and he can phase through solid objects. Well, by solid objects, I mean chain link fences, paintings, and ice, and that's it. These caps are great on paper, but they're just not that useful in the actual game. I think the only one I actually used was the wing cap, and I only used it on Shifting Sandland because it was at the very beginning of the level start. Any other level, I'd have to go out into the map and find the wing cap, and at that point, why would I waste my time going to the wing cap when I can just go straight to the star and beat the level? Same thing with the metal and vanish caps. Like, being immune to all damage is great on paper, but they're very short duration power-ups, you know? They have a very strict time limit. So by the time I run off all the way to go find one, I'm gonna lose the power-up by the time I get back to where I need to be. Each of these caps were only helpful for the handful of stars that required them. There were maybe 4 or 5 stars per cap that absolutely needed the cap to get them. And that was it. So they were great on paper, but really they didn't do much for me in the actual gameplay. I don't have a good way to segue these last bits of complaints, but I do want to complain about them just because I'm ranting here. Why do I find 1-ups and they run away from me? Like, isn't the challenge the fact that I found the 1-up, and the 1-up is the reward? Why do they then continue to run off a cliff? How come every time Mario's blasted by fire, he runs around uncontrollably with his butt on fire? Do you know how much of a pain in the ass this is when enemies are spitting fireballs, and he lights on fire and just runs off the side of a narrow platform and I die or lose progress? There are these launch bots in TikTok Clock and Wet Dry World. Essentially, they just launch Mario way up in the air, which can actually be helpful if you're trying to skip parts of the level. But what can also happen is that they launch Mario up in the air, and then he falls and takes fall damage. And what happens is he gets stunned for a considerable amount of time. Long enough for the bot to come back and launch Mario again before you're able to recover. So you can pretty much get infinite comboed to death because you have no way of escaping the stun period. There's this point in Tiny Huge Island where you're supposed to intentionally jump off a cliff edge and have the wind blow you up to the next rock ledge. And Tiny Huge Island is a later map in the game, so every other map up until this point has conditioned me not to jump off ledges because that equals bad and death. For some reason, they just randomly expect you to do that in this end game portion and assume it works, which it doesn't, by the way. There were many times I ran off the cliff edge and the wind just didn't pick me up. It was such a stupid idea. Why didn't you just give me another rock platform to jump up? For some reason, the health gauge and the air gauge for Mario are measured in the same place, and those two things tend to intertwine. Now, I could understand that, drowning or losing your air underwater would drain your life, make you closer to death, but what also happens is that I could get my liver ripped out by a giant eel, and then I poke my head above the surface and fully heal because I got my air back, therefore I got all my life back. I'm not gonna lie, I abused this a little bit whenever water was readily available. If I got my ass beat by creatures on the surface, I'd just go take a quick dive in the water and it would fully heal me because my air, quote unquote, was full. Therefore, my health was full. Now, I only experienced one game-breaking glitch throughout the entirety of Super Mario 64, and that was in Hazy Maze Cave when this little spider guy smacked me into the boulder hole, and you're supposed to just fall down the hole and die, but Mario ended up sliding back and forth between two slopes of the hole, so I couldn't go into the hole and die, and I couldn't jump my way out. I was just infinitely sliding back and forth with no escape. I ended up having to hard reset my game to kind of escape this situation. Time to wind down a bit. I feel like I really went on a bit of a rant there, but I guess that's why I'm calling this video what I'm calling it. So look, Super Mario 64, here's my final thoughts on this deal. It was undeniably a mind-blowing game of its time, but I also think it's a product of its time, and it did not age well, especially in some very key aspects of the gameplay. I would say the first third of the game, I was having a blast. I thought this game even stood the test of time and could hold its own in today's standards. By the second third of the game, I could see the flaws starting to shine through a bit, but it still wasn't bad. I was still having a grand old time. But by that third point of the game, when I'm struggling with maps like Tick-Tock Clock and Rainbow Ride, and Mario does not control smoothly, and the camera's fighting against me, and I'm constantly falling off these treacherous linear paths that go against the 3D design of the game up until this point, it was very frustrating. I was wandering around in the end game, just ready for the game to end. Super Mario 64 looks and sounds great, and I would even defend that today, and it got some gameplay elements just absolutely nailed, but completely dropped the ball on the other. If I had to rate Super Mario 64 on my scale, which is going to go from S, meaning a nearly perfect game with no flaws, down to A, B, C, D, F, and then Z, which is a game that is utter trash with nothing redeemable, I'd have to put Super Mario 64 to C. Normally C would be like a painfully average or mediocre game. In my case here, Super Mario 64 just did so much right, and also so much wrong, that it kinda counteracted. The highs were really high, but the lows were really low. I definitely suggest everyone goes out and tries Super Mario 64 for themselves. Don't just take my word for it. Despite my opinion, I am super glad I played this game, and I'm not even upset about spending money on it. I feel like if I'd never played Super Mario 64, I would have just gone on feeling like I missed out on such a revered title. But now that I've played it, now that I've got to experience it for myself, it wouldn't hurt my feelings if I never came back to it. I don't particularly have any lingering interest to replay the game. But that's just my thoughts. Let me know your guys' thoughts about Super Mario 64 in the comments down below. If you like this video, please feel free to leave me a like. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. And if you want to see more videos in this kind of manner, feel free to subscribe and I'd be happy to make more. Thank you guys. I hope to see you guys in the next one.